Impossible. That's what Ms. Langford said as she slammed my test on the desk like she was announcing a verdict, not returning a paper. The whole room folded inward. 23 kids holding their breath, the fluorescent lights humming, and that red 100 glaring back at me like an accusation. You ever had a moment where a single word makes you feel small and enormous all at once? Yeah, that happened. My name's Maya Thompson. I keep a tiny carved knight in my pocket. My grandfather's worn smooth from years of rubbing it when he told me stories. He taught me chess the way some people teach prayer patient relentless, with a kind of stubborn faith that the board would eventually reward honest strategy. When Ms. Langford pointed at my paper and said, "You explain this, Maya," she wasn't asking a question. She was handing me her assumptions wrapped in authority. She called security. Officer Mill's shoes squeaking on the linoleum like a taunting metronome, and had me escorted down to Principal Rhodes's office. "Prove you didn't cheat," he said without a blink. "Fail, and we'll recommend expulsion." They left me with that one choice to carry home prove I'm honest, or watch everything my family saved for my future get stripped away. It didn't feel like a test anymore. It felt like a trap. This wasn't the first time someone had sized me up and decided what I was worth. Ridgewood Prep sits on a hill with manicured lawns and grant plaques in the lobby. The Hartwell Foundation liked clean numbers that fit certain stories, the right percentages in the right programs, the right faces in the picture. My mom, Rosa, worked nights at the clinic to keep a roof over our heads. She used to squeeze my shoulder before dawn and say, "Maya, don't let them tell you who's allowed to be brilliant." That line used to sound like something people say in movies. Turns out, in real life, you need that kind of movie-level faith sometimes. The district test had been anonymous. Student ID numbers, no names. For once, I let myself answer every question the way I knew how, not the way I thought a girl like me was expected to answer. When the results came back perfect, somebody's math thought that was statistically suspect. Ms. Langford's face, that thin smile with an edge, told me this was about more than a page of answers. It was about a narrative she and the school had been keeping, who gets opportunities and who doesn't. They gave me 3 days. 3 days to study for a Friday verification test in the auditorium with teachers and administrators watching like it was a trial. 3 days for a place that had for years quietly steered students out of advanced tracks if their presence threatened whatever metrics the Hartwell grant required. When my mom dug into school records and found 2 kids who'd been accused before, both black, both gone, the pattern wasn't a coincidence anymore. It was a policy wearing a smile. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I turned to the thing that had never lied to me, the board. Online, I played under the name Nightshade and beat a college sophomore who swore the connection had been lagging. It felt good to win in a space where no one knew my face. A stranger on the forum, calling himself Mentor Hale, started messaging me. He sent practice problems, quiet encouragements, and once, a link to a leather-bound book with a note, "Page 189 might help. Marcus Hale." The name meant nothing at first until he told me he had been my grandfather's student, that Dr. Harold Grant had been a mathematician and a chess composer, left with a handful of published puzzles and a reputation in quiet academic corners. Mentor Hale. Dr. Marcus Hale said he'd quietly invited a couple people to the auditorium, an educational policy researcher, a district observer, maybe even a local reporter who owed him a favor. He told me, "Don't play their game. Change the game." That was the pivot. The chess move no one sees until it lands. On Friday, Ridgewood Prep tried to stage a humiliation. Ms. Langford arranged questions like a minefield. Advanced literature physics that read like a freshman syllabus, calculus problems with traps. They meant to rattle me, make me rush, make me crack. Instead, I worked methodically. I showed my steps. I took my time. Every time she leaned over my shoulder and hissed, "Faster," I looked up and said, "The rules don't say I rush. They say I answer." Little shockwaves went through the room when I did that, when I used their own paper to hold them to their rules. And then came their big finale, a chess position projected for everyone, billed as a final, unpreparable challenge to prove I couldn't possibly have the kind of strategic mind needed to get any of this right. The projection showed a position from a book I knew, a layout my grandfather had used in his classes. My pulse did something weird, like a pawn sneaking into the back rank. Instead of writing the answer, I stood up and asked to demonstrate on a real board, citing the exact clause in the verification guidelines that allowed an alternate demonstration. Principal Rhodes hesitated, looking at the observers Dr. Hale had brought, then shrugged. Ms. Langford rummaged for a set like she'd rehearsed this humiliation 100 times. When she set the woodboard down and I began moving pieces, the room changed pitch. Each thunk of a piece was a punctuation mark. Knight to F5. I said, moving the knight threatens the queen and creates a discovered check. I explained the whole sequence, 8 moves deep, saying aloud what every single move did strategically, why black was forced into a sacrifice, and how mate became inevitable. I used the same language my grandfather had used, the kind of clinical affection for beauty that makes complicated things feel simple. When I finished and placed the final piece, Dr. Hale stood up and said, "That's Grant's knot." He told them about my grandfather, about the published puzzle, and then, calmly, devastatingly, he showed a photograph and a citation. The room swallowed its breath. He then pulled up data. 9 years of advanced program selections at Ridgewood Prep, broken down by race, and an email chain between administrators about keeping Hartwell's expectations satisfied. The numbers were a needle in a haystack. Then the magnet grabbed the rest. Observers scribbled. A reporter lifted her phone. All at once, the whole thing was no longer about me. It was about the system, about what schools do when incentives line up with prejudice. My mother stood up in the front row and asked what I had been thinking about all along. Are you going to fix one kid, or will you fix the thing that made this possible? Principal Rhodes offered the standard quick fix. Placement in the Advanced Scholars Program, apologies. We didn't take the bait. Dr. Hale and the district people pushed for an audit for blind evaluations for a review of placement criteria, real structural changes, not Band-Aids. 3 months later, Ridgewood's auditorium had a new plaque, the Equity Assessment Initiative. Names changed on brochures, and for the first time students were submitted for advanced tracks without names attached, just answers and work. The Hartwell Foundation revised its rubric under public pressure, rewarding schools that broadened access instead of those that curated it. Ms. Langford was moved to curriculum development, a role that used her skills but kept her from being the final gatekeeper over kids' futures. Principal Rhodes kept his job, but he sat in trainings until his calendar bowed under them. What mattered most to me wasn't the plaque or the headlines. It was the chess club that started meeting in an old classroom on Tuesdays. Kids from every corner of the district, kids who had never touched a pawn before, now learning to think ahead. I taught a 6-year-old named Deja how a sacrifice can lead to a better position. Her grin, after that first successful tactic, was better than any ribbon. My mother, after a settlement that included a scholarship named for Dr. Grant, went back to school and finally finished her degree. The quiet justice of that felt better than any public apology. I won't pretend it felt like instant victory. There were people who dug in, who wrote op-eds about special treatment, who said the numbers were blown out of proportion. There were nights I replayed the auditorium moment and felt a strange loneliness. The enormity of the fight made me wonder how many kids never got a Dr. Hale, a mom who would not back down, or a carved knight for luck. But I also felt something else, the flattening of that old familiar fear until it was only a memory, and the room for something else in its place. A place where merit could be judged without the shadow of expectation. So here's what I want to leave you with. Have you ever been written off because of the way you look or where you come from, or a label someone else put on you? Did you fight back, or did you have to walk away? Drop a comment telling us what happened, talk about the time you were underestimated, or the time you saw someone else get a raw deal and did nothing. If you think systems need fixing, say what you'd change. If you think this was one isolated incident, say that too. I want to hear both sides. If this story moved you, subscribe and share. Not because I want praise, but because these conversations build pressure, and pressure makes change. Tell someone who needs to hear that being underestimated isn't the end of the game. And hey, if you play chess, tell me your favorite opening. I still lose to the Sicilian sometimes, but I like the fight.